Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of Field Notes, the weekly podcast on all things agribusiness from the Hindu Business Line. Just a week ago, the global management consultancy Bain came out with a new report on Indian agriculture. The small 10-page report received plenty of attention. It says that the $370 billion Indian agriculture industry is ripe for disruption, and the recent regulatory and technological changes would create a massive value of 30 to 35 billion dollars by 2025. We have with us Parijat Jain, one of the report's three authors. Parijat leads Bain's agribusiness practice in India and is based out of Delhi. He's an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad and has a master's degree in chemical engineering from IIT Delhi. Welcome, Parijat. How are you?
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you for having me.
Um, Let me preface this question. The world of management consulting is replete with reports based on irrational exuberance that kind of feed the frenzy and end up creating bubbles. Why do you think we are at the cusp of a massive transformation in the Indian agri sector, Parijat?
Yeah. Thanks, Vivek. I think you're right. I wouldn't comment on how other management consulting firms work, but I think what is key to understand is that we believe that there is a mega trend, the underlying trends of multiple angles that are really coming into force right now that are almost irreversible, right? And what do I mean by that is, for example, there is a shift in consumer behavior. A lot of the farmers and the farmer households today, as you see over the next decade, are going to be digital natives rather than just somebody who needed to learn how to use a mobile phone. There's a consumer behavior in preference of technology and the ease of using technology.
Mhm.
The second is the ubiquity of technology itself, which basically means technology is pervasive. It is available in your mobile phone. There is almost a computer in your hand. There's a computing power in your hand, as well as the data transmission costs are low. And so the transfer of information and the transfer of actually accurate information of not just what to do now from a farmer's perspective, but also what's going to happen tomorrow, whether it's going to be rainy, what's the precipitation levels, should you actually sow your seeds today versus sow your seeds actually 3 days later. All that information can be gathered and disseminated at a reasonable cost, but also to a reasonable level of accuracy from a region perspective. It's not for a state or a district, but actually can get down to quite a nuanced view of where your farm is or where your area of cultivation is. So I think there are changes in the consumer behavior. There are changes in technology and people's ability to use that. And I think all of this will accelerate um, farmers as well as the farming practices into more technology friendly solutions, which fundamentally will be a lot more efficient, which will improve productivity, reduce wastage, and also improve the utilization of inputs, apart from obviously thinking about output connectivity as well as logistics management, which are other areas that we'll talk about. But we feel that this shift has happened, and therefore we are quite confident and excited about the fact what lies ahead in the next decade.
Mhm, mhm. Some might argue that given the current status and maturity of even the biggest agri-tech firms in India right now, your estimate of a 30 to 35 billion dollar value pool being created in the next few years, is it a bit generous? Are you painting a picture of sunlit uplands that are very far or perhaps don't exist?
No, I wouldn't think so. I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic on Indian agriculture, and I think if our estimate is reflects that optimism, but also reflect that conservatism to a certain extent. We've been quite measured in our extrapolation or projection of where the value pools will be. I mean, if you just think about it, the Indian agriculture today is anywhere between 350 to 400 billion dollars.
Mhm.
Given the size of our economy. Uh, agriculture actually is the only sector that has shown robust growth even in the years of COVID, and we actually think that it's going to continue to increase at a reasonable growth pace. In that context, I feel that the areas that we have outlined, whether it's output marketplaces, input marketplaces, and supply chain logistics, highlighted in the report,
Mhm.
I think 30 to 35 billion value pool um, is not that difficult to achieve. In fact, I think if everything goes right, that number could be higher as well, just given the size of the market and I think the growth potential
Mhm.
that exists in the market today.
Mhm. No, I ask you this because any good news or a positive prognostication about Indian agriculture almost elicits a sense of disbelief. Because we're used to hearing dire stories about Indian agriculture, and we're always told that it's a huge problem area. The usual tropes that we hear about how one section tries to make a case about it being almost unredemptive. The usual tropes of being of fragmented land holdings, or the need to
Sure.
take out so many people from agriculture, and the need to put them into more productive industry.
Yeah,
That seems to our ears seem to be attuned to hearing that kind of analysis.
yeah. No, I think no, I agree, and that's been the narrative for, unfortunately, the narrative for the past many years and decades. And the challenge, Vivek, with Indian agriculture has been that fundamentally it's a small farmholder ecosystem, right? So if you have a land holding of 1 acre, 2 acre, etc., the surplus that a farmer can generate at 30, 40,000 rupees an annum, or 50, 60,000 rupees per annum, or at least from a crop cycle, um, isn't enough to sustain, or is just barely enough to sustain. Um, if you add over that the complexity of high finance cost and the unorganized sector financing cost, that is what actually gets farmers into a debt trap. And we hear the kind of news that we hear, the unfortunate news of many farmers committing suicides, etc. I think the answer is to this problem is not that we, this is my personal opinion. The answer is not to get a bunch of people out from agriculture and get them into manufacturing. That's been the China model, and there are merits and demerits for that. But I feel that the answer is now to transform agriculture in a way by better use of technology, because there is no reason as to why agriculture should be 15, 20% of our economy. It can actually become a larger portion of our economy.
Mhm.
And the technology exists today, along with the financial inclusion methods of online payment and having the right credit history, that we can have shared operating costs, we can have shared ownerships. There are many, let's say, equipment P2P rental platforms, which is just the beginning of what we call shared ownership and time sharing models and equipment or asset sharing models that can
Mhm.
come in, that are attuned to offering a solution to using technology, but without actually paying the entire 100% capital expenditure on it, right?
You mean
And I think that is what will
Uberization
change.
of farm machinery?
Uberization of farm machinery is the start of it, right? So now you can have a tractor, for example, that 10 people can own, or you can rent it by day, right? Just think about it. For example, if you have drones that are surveying your fields, and spraying whether insecticide or pesticide accurately based on image recognition. For a farmer who has a 1 acre land parcel, it's very difficult to invest in that drone, and have that operate over his or her field. But if you think about it, 10, 15, 20 people can buy that drone, and use that to service their fields. And the monetary and technology exists today, and the monetary mechanisms exist today to be able to share that cost amongst 10 people.
Mhm.
um, and and the more and I think that's what excites me, is that over the next 3 to 5 years, or maybe 5 to 7 years, we'll be in a situation where this will almost become ubiquitous. Time sharing models and asset sharing models and cost sharing models will become the norm. And
Mhm.
the pay per use for any product or service will also become the norm. which will be fantastic because then even small farmholder ecosystem can afford to pay for 1 hour of any equipment usage or 1 day of any equipment usage without having to own it. I think
Mhm.
that's something that is fundamentally going to change, and that is where technology will play a critical role.
Okay. Parijat, let me quote from your report. You say the idea of doubling farmer incomes in the next few years is likely to become a reality based on the technological and regulatory changes in this sector. Are you placing your bets on the regulatory changes, that might end up getting stuck in the quagmire of competitive politics, as we are seeing with farm protests and the government putting on hold the reform measures?
Yeah, Vivek, no, that's a great question. I feel that the increase in farmer incomes and the increase in farmer surpluses year over year is going to come from two main areas. One is increase in productivity, and the increase in productivity actually comes from usage of better quality inputs, which are and people are getting access to better quality inputs no matter where they are. There are many input marketplaces that have come up. There's a lot more information available about when to sow, what type of seeds to use. Should you sow today? Should you sow tomorrow? There's likelihood of rain, etc. What's the precipitation levels, etc. I think there is a lot more information that is available again through usage of technology, through usage of just your mobile phone. There's going to be an increase in productivity. There's going to be a simultaneously reduction in wastage because you'll have market linkages on the output side.
Mhm.
Um, and all of that fundamentally will lead to disintermediation of the value chain, and that's a fancy word, but what it fundamentally means is it gets the farmer closer to the actual consumer of the food, but it also gets the farmer closer to the actual producer of his inputs. Now, whether that's a
Mhm.
fertilizer, whether that's a growth product, whether that's a seed, etc. And with the
Mhm.
right information, I think you can take better decisions. Farmers can take better decisions on the farm and off the farm, right?
Mhm.
To double the farmer income, it's important that a farmer actually reduces the wastage, gets the right quality of inputs, and then improves yield. Um, and that is where a majority of the surplus is going to get created.
Mhm.
Just giving you an example, if you start using, let's say, drip irrigation, or if you start using the right quantity of fertilizer, the cost of the inputs can actually go down to the extent of 30 to 40%. Farmers
Mhm.
typically use more fertilizer and use more pesticides because they don't know either which pesticide to use or how much fertilizer to apply in many cases, right? And if there is a nuanced understanding of what to apply when, there can be a reduction in the amount of inputs that are actually going into the production of any crop. I
Mhm.
think those are the two areas where the farmer incomes will get increased, and there is massive scope. Doubling is one area, but I would say that there is there is a fundamental change where you can actually rotate crop cycles. You can think about not just wheat and paddy cycles, but you can even get into horticulture where farmers can do crop rotation and actually produce higher value and higher quality crops, for let's say certain part of the year.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Uh,
I think regulations part is something which will accelerate this trend, whether it's market access, whether it's, the APMC Act and again, reduction in the expense across the value chain, which we've alluded
mhm.
to in our report. All of
Mhm.
that will accelerate this particular trend. But I
Mhm.
don't think that regulation or regulatory changes are mandatory for this change to happen. I think there will be an accelerant to the change in terms of increasing farmer incomes.
So your analysis will hold good even if the farm laws are kept in abeyance for another 3 years?
Sure. As I
Okay.
said, the regulatory changes, uh, when they happen and how they're implemented, will accelerate this change. But I don't think that they are the cornerstone of our assumption and our analysis.
Right. That sounds promising. Um, I'll quote you another passage from the report. You say that we see the sector benefiting from a today forward, future back approach,
Yeah,
where organizations can maximize the potential of the current business by becoming cheaper, better, faster, broader, and greener. What do you mean by this approach, future forward? Have I
yeah.
got it right? Yeah,
No,
forward,
it's
future.
today
Yeah,
forward and future back, right?
yeah.
So let me
Sorry, yeah, I
explain.
got mixed up.
Um, so when we think about today forward approach, Vivek, it's doing the things that you're doing today, but doing it more efficiently. Okay.
Hmm.
And if I go back the agricultural landscape, till 1800s or 1850s, before the industrialization um, kicked in into any meaningful way, there was a traditional way of doing agriculture, which was basically the inputs were local inputs, but I think the input of the all the energy that was going into the field was either human energy or animal energy, right? I mean, so you have, you know, domesticated animals doing agriculture and you had humans doing agriculture, right? Then there came the era of mechanization. And that's where, honestly, we are currently today. We have better equipment, we have better, more, we have stronger equipment, we have more ubiquitous kind of solutions, but fundamentally it's using energy and equipment and mechanized equipment to actually do agriculture. And fertilizers, etc., are a part of that. Right. Now we are into an age where, and this actually helped us to support the growth of the human population from whatever 1-2 billion that it was at the turn of the century, from 1800s to 1900s, to 6.5-7 billion over this century. And it only happened because we increased the production of fertilizers, we increased the level of mechanization, so we increased the efficiency of agriculture multifold. Not just in India, but I'm talking globally, right?
Hmm.
Now we've entered into another phase of agriculture, which is what I call precision agriculture, or fundamentally saying that I can um, I can produce any crop or any plant individually, and figure out whether it needs a pesticide, it needs an insecticide, what inputs to give, when to give it, when to water it, etc. Very simple example of that is, let's say, drip irrigation. Um, and drip irrigation actually consumes less water, but gives better quality product, right? So precision agriculture, and so as you think about these, this development, this is today forward, which means I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm going to grow plants and I'm going to grow crops, but I'm going to grow them more effectively. There'll be less wastage, there'll be higher yield, and I do that better, right?
Hmm.
What we say, future back, is saying I'm going to do things differently, right? So one example of that, which is already on the anvil and you would have heard about, is, let's say, Impossible Foods. It is meat, but it is not meat. It is a lab-based product, which is obviously now mass-produced, but it's something that was fundamentally, uh, something that is fundamentally not grown on trees, right? It's grown in a lab, for example. Many companies, whether you say Impossible Foods or Air Protein or stuff like that, where the food that we will eat will be partially grown on land and in trees or in greenhouses, but it will also be grown in labs. And it'll be far more efficient to produce, it'll be far more nutritious to produce, to eat, and also it'll be far higher yield and less wastage and less resource intensive. And as we think about the human population growing from, whatever, 8, 9, 10 billion over the next 30, 40, 50 years, we will need to have this change in the way we produce food and what we consume for it to be sustainable.
Hmm.
There, whether we can feed a population of 10 billion, um, the kind of food that we are eating today and the kind of and in the manner that we are producing the food today is a real question, and I don't think that it is sustainable to do so. So as we think about today forward, it's about producing more efficiently, but if you think about future back, it's about doing things differently.
Hmm. Parijat, how is, in the Indian context, how is digital disruption in agriculture playing out now, and how will it in the future? How do you see it playing out in the future? And also, more importantly, will it benefit the farmers, or as the bugaboo goes, with any technological intervention or innovation, the fear that they will be left behind?
Yeah. So so digital disruption is a big word, but fundamentally, what I believe is that there will be more and more use of technology. And when I say technology, it's better access to information, it's better access to equipment, it's better access to inputs,
Mhm.
and it's better access to output, or for the consumer, it's better access to output. If you want to, let's say, buy a fresh produce that is being produced by a farmer 3 days ago, it should be straightforward for you to do that, right? Um, and on all of those things, when I think about digital disruption landscape in India, it's not, let's say, going back a few years, a lot of the disruption or a lot of the investment was actually focused around managing the supply chain well, right? So what we call output linkages. So people or corporations would buy output from the farmers, and then let's say they would provide that to hotel chains or retail chains, or large corporations, right? So they're kind of disintermediating the logistics to a certain extent, but that is where the innovation was.
Mhm.
Today, if you see, there are startups across the value chain. There are startups who are trying to you know work across input marketplaces. There are startups who are doing things across activities on the farm now, whether it's better information access, or it's precision agriculture, or it's actually giving advice specific to your crop. You can click a photograph and send it on an app, and then it can tell you what kind of pesticide or insecticide to use, etc., which is very specific to the issue at hand.
Mhm.
um, and the technology that this is actually emanating from is image processing, which fundamentally had actually nothing to do with agriculture when it was started, but just has so many applications.
Mhm.
And then there are applications and investments that are happening off the farm or on the supply chain side as well, right? And that's why I feel that the digital disruption uh, has now become a lot more broad based across the agri value chain.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing that gives me confidence that there will be innovative models that will come out across the agriculture value chain, across different crops. There are pilots that are happening across different states, and there are like n number of startups that are actually present in India at this point of time.
Mhm.
Um, and the number is actually in the hundreds, if not close to 1,000.
Mhm.
So that's what gives me confidence that digital disruption is going to be a lot more broad based, and the
Mhm.
pace of technological development is only going to increase.
Mhm.
That's one part, and the second part of the question, which you said, is whether the farmers will actually benefit from it or not.
Mhm.
Um, I think the farmers are likely to benefit. Why has the farmer not benefited so far? A fundamental reason for that is information asymmetry to a certain extent. And the second reason is, what I would call a suboptimal access to market. As a farmer, in most of the situations, you are mandated to sell your produce to the APMC, local mandi, or to someone who's actually has a license with the local APMC.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel that one, as information asymmetry reduces, you can just go to the internet and figure out what to do. There are multiple platforms that give you the right information, right from remote sensing satellites to actual local weather stations to applications that are encouraging peer-to-peer advice to disseminate best practices. I think farmers in the end will have better information, will have better access to markets for their produce, and will have better access to inputs, and
Mhm.
that will fundamentally change their position and their negotiating power. So
Mhm.
to me, it doesn't seem like farmers will remain out of it.
Okay. Okay. What are the mega trends in agri-tech that you see shaping this transformation that you talk about?
Yeah. No, I think we touched on it a couple of questions ago, but I think there are two or three. One is as I said, the shift in consumer behavior,
Mhm.
the way I would put it is that a significant chunk of farmers now becoming digital natives or influencers, their children who will be influencing their decisions or helping them on the field, becoming digital natives, right? So 5 years from now, the average 25-year-old, as I keep saying, was a person who would have been born in the year 2000, in the age of internet, in the age of information symmetry, and rather than information asymmetry.
Mhm.
And that I think will fundamentally change the for the lack of a better word, embracing of new ways of doing things and embracing of technology. I think that shift is likely to happen now, especially in the next decade. That's one mega trend, which is the consumer part. The second mega trend is, we touched upon it, is just the financial inclusion and the time sharing model or the asset sharing models becoming feasible and becoming a lot more uh, attuned to the small farm holder ecosystem. And that's where the shift will change. So if the farmer can actually pay for 5 minutes of usage of a drone or 30 minutes of usage of a tractor and can actually figure out, okay, I need to sow this type of seed, and the best time to sow it is not today, but actually 2 days from now, because the probability of rain is highest in 48 hours. I think that fundamentally changes the game of productivity. And so there is that information sharing, which is the technology which is becoming available and cheap. There is the consumer behavior, which is kind of embracing that technology. And then there are financial models that I feel are able to offer solutions which are basically converting capital expenditure into operating expenditure, uh, and doing that in a manner that small farm holder ecosystems can use that and pay for it and actually use that to generate surplus. Um, and once that starts, it will attain critical mass very quickly, right? And then it kind of increases at a rapid pace. It can happen in 2 years, it can happen in 3 years, but it's definitely not something that's 10 years away.
Right, Parijat, thank you very much for joining us on Field Notes today. I hope your figures are indeed on the conservative side.
Thank you for having me. Very good speaking with you.